Resume recording. There it is. That's so difficult to understand. Resume.
Oh.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm here today with Chris Johnson, Esquire. I always wonder what that Esquire means, other than a lots and lots of time in school. Right?
Or like the country squire, if it's a close relation. I'm not.
That's right.
I've never known either.
Sheesh. So Chris is a wills and trust attorney and professional, and with dual practices in Pasadena and the desert communities. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. So Chris and I think we've known each other essentially because of architecture to begin with, right?
Yeah. Both into the mid-century stuff.
That's
and then
right.
I found out you're Mr. Mid-Century.
That's right. Literally and figuratively. So today's talk is about the changes in Proposition 19, which passed recently. Prop 19 is going to go into effect February
16th.
February the 16th of 2021. And you could say it dramatically changes how property is passed from one generation to another. So Prop 19, it says, billed as the property tax transfers, exemptions, and revenue for wildfire agencies and counties amendment. Wow. A politician didn't come up with that.
Not at all. And, they want to make sure the meaning is clear just from the title.
Jeez. I tell you. Okay, so what this article says is, for residents age 55 and older, severely disabled, or a victim of a wildfire natural disaster, there's much to like about Prop 19. So effective April the 1st, for whatever reason, why it's a couple of months later, those eligible homeowners can sell their homes and take their property tax base with them to any other property they buy for the same value or less in the state of California. Right? So what does that mean to us? If our house is worth $1 million and we go and we buy a house for $1.5 million, right? We're going to take that $1 million tax basis with us?
It does. But if the new house is more money, then as I understand it, there's a formula in there so that you take up to the value of the home you sold, you take that tax basis with you.
Right.
And then the additional that you spend upgrading your house, well, then that part will be taxed at that in basically the value at the time you buy the house.
Right.
So
Gotcha.
say if you sell $1 million house, buy a $1.5 million house, well, then that extra $500,000, you are going to be paying property taxes based on that. But if your $1 million had an assessed value of more like $350,000, you'll keep that same Prop 13 assessment.
Right. And that saves you tremendous amounts of money when you're moving, when you're transferring, going to another home.
Yeah. And I guess the other piece was that under the current or soon to be former law is you could only do it once, but also it had to be within the same county or with a county that would accept that. And some of them did not. Some of them didn't want to play the game. So you might be stuck, moving to a desirable county, but paying extra property tax.
Right. So it's in reading this, the biggest change for me seems to be when somebody passes away and you're left property. If you're not occupying that property as your primary residence, right, you're paying a stepped up tax basis, right?
Yeah. So I can say, well, step up, and we'll get into this maybe in some of the strategies later, but there's the federal tax that clients get confused because, normally we don't have to think about taxes, but say federal and state income tax, there's the tax basis, which is kind of what you pay capital gains tax on, basically. And
Right.
That usually is the purchase price. And then when we say step up, the estate tax law, at least currently in the way it's been for the last several decades, is that when someone dies and you inherit property, you get a new income tax basis. So parents bought the house for $200,000. It's now worth $2 million. That new basis is fair market value at the time you inherited. That's $2 million. So if you sold it, then basically you pay no capital gains tax. Whereas,
as it is now.
yeah,
Right.
as currently now, and yes, with the new administration and possibly new Senate and Congress, there is talk of changing that. But there's always been talk, and it's been threatened to take away or being taken away for as long as I've been in practice, 25 years. So we shall see. But that's the current amount. The last time they had the non-step up in basis, I understand, was sometime in the 70s. And there was a lawyer who was really excited about it because he learned all about it. And then 2 years later, they went back to the step up in basis because it's a whole lot easier for tax preparers.
Wow. So going forward, and after February 16th, was it for the 1st, 16th?
Yeah. So the February 16th change that's the change in the law for California property tax.
Right.
And so that's when, and it may, on the selling part, I will have to look it up. That may actually be, something where you can move your property tax basis from house to house. That may not start till April 1st. But I guess for us estate planners, we're looking at, well, when's the last time we can still take advantage of the old law? And that is basically a deed that's got to be with the county recorder by February 15th. Mm-hmm. And as the way the law is now, it's pretty generous. It was Prop 58, and I can't tell you when that passed, but sometime after Prop 13. And that says that for your principal residence, when it goes between parents and children, and usually it's parents to children, but it's the other way around too. If a parent were to inherit or get a gift or even buy the house from the kids, either way, between those two groups of people, then you can apply with the county assessor and you will keep that seller's or transferor's property tax basis, which was huge because, especially if it's unlimited for your principal residence, kids would inherit the house and they pay the same property tax that the parents did, which is very nice. And then in addition to that, there's an extra $1 million that could also be used and passed down to kids. And I say kids, it can go back up to the parents, but usually it's down from parents to kids. Of that $1 million of assessed value that you could also use to keep paying that same property tax your parents did. So again,
sorry, Chris, can you give me an example of how that $1 million is used?
Yeah. So say they've got a rental property that's maybe it's worth $1.5 million, but the assessed value, the value that they pay property taxes on and shows up on the property tax bill, say that's $450,000. Well, that the kids could keep that same value, so they keep paying property taxes based on that $450,000, and then in addition, because you can pass down $1 million of assessed value under Prop 58, there's an additional, what is that, $550,000 of other property assessed value that they could use. So a lot of property moved down to kids this way. And, the assessed value, if they'd held it a long time, is going to be well under the actual value. So that $1 million could go pretty far. And it was a great benefit.
That's amazing. So it's not, so the one benefit of being in California when you inherit property is if you inherit property and it's worth $1 million upon the death of that person who left it to you, and you sell it for $1 million, there's no taxable event there. Is that right? To the person that's inherited the property.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, and most of the time, people are selling it they don't want to keep it, or maybe it's got to be divided up among a whole lot of people.
Right.
And so they want their money. So it gets sold. And that means, if, because it's inherited and you get the step up in basis, there is not going to be any tax that's owed on that. And then estate tax wise, and I know it's not part of our broadcast today, but the other tax that people always ask about, what about estate taxes? Well, that right now, that's also pretty generous. That's 11.6 million roughly.
That's right.
And so most people, when they get that house or they get the apartments from mom and dad or grandma and grandpa and sell it, there's probably going to be no tax at all involved in that situation.
Right. Now, I helped a family sell, and they inherited the property and they held it for a year for lots of different reasons. Their emotional attachment was one of the bigger reasons they held on to it for a year. So there was a taxable event there because it had appreciated almost $100,000 in a year's time, right? So when the person passed away, it was worth $1 million, and it sold for $1.1 million a year later, right? So they were taxed on the gain on $100,000.
Yeah, yeah. So
That's still not terrible.
not awful, and there is a deduction of expenses. So, like the expenses from the sale are a deduction against that gain. So, your commission, the attorney's fees, whatever CPA fees or other administrative expenses, say with the trust.
Right.
So, at least that, I'm sure they don't like paying money, but at least you'd say, hey, there is an advantage to paying your broker and attorney
That's
all that
right.
money.
Well, excuse me. We just, somebody handed you $1 million essentially. So congratulations. Be happy. Make a big charitable donation.
You'd be surprised. Some people still, it still hurts. There's always something to complain about.
So one of the things that one of the articles I'm reading about Prop 19, they talk about a qualified personal residence trust. So how does that, could it be part of a revocable trust or a irrevocable trust when somebody passes?
It's an irrevocable trust. It's something that it won't really get you around Prop 19. Says the actual transfer doesn't occur in the assessor's eyes until the end of that term. But we've used them for clients, and the basic way it works is you make a gift, you set up this personal residence trust, say for a term that you're sure you're going to outlive because you have to make it work. So, maybe set it up for 6 or 10 years or something like that. But you keep the right to live in it during that term. And so, so then at the end of that, it's going to go out to the kids or whoever your beneficiaries of that trust are. And a lot of times, if you don't want to give it outright, it can stay in trust for their benefit. But at the end of the term, basically, it's out of your hands. You don't have the right to live in it anymore, but a lot of times people set up a rental agreement, and it's a good way to move more money out of the estate then. And the advantage to it is that you use some tables from the IRS based on current interest rates to figure out what's the present value of that gift. Like, I'm giving you this house, but you're not getting it until 10 years from now. And so, the house may be $1 million, but the tables say the gift is worth $700,000. So you're moving an asset out and basically at a discount. And so that for people, usually if we use it, if there's some estate tax that's going to be owed at the time they pass away.
Right.
Because in most of these strategies that we look at, if you're making a gift during your lifetime, what you miss out on is that step up in capital gains tax basis. Because if you make a gift during lifetime, the receiver gets your basis in it. So that's also something to consider, as we see, the kind of the panic of like, well, should I give away my house now so the kids can keep the low property tax, well, the trade-off is they're also going to get your basis. And if that's low, maybe the capital gains taxes say it's a better deal to just wait and inherit it.
Right. Phew. So, well, I mean, step one in any estate plan is to have a will and a trust in place, right? If you own property, you own a house, you have assets, is to put them in a will and a trust. Is that right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. If you've got, basically in California, if you've got any real estate, um, with some exceptions, then it makes sense to have the trust. It's almost always cheaper to avoid the probate process. And really, the best way to do that is by having a living trust and putting your property into it.
Mm.
There are some other ways, but they've all got their drawbacks. Where the trust, I think, just works out very well. And also, it's important to know too that even if you've got a will, you're still going to go through probate. The will does not avoid the probate process.
Right.
And I think a lot of times people misunderstand that because they've done something. And sometimes the will is even sold as avoiding probate. And in other states, that might be true, but California, it's not. You've got to do the trust. And so whether you do nothing, which is 70% of us, or you do the will, then you're still going to see probate. We're doing the trust, and probably the best advertisement for a trust I see are the probate clients when they go through the process. And we try to make it as painless as possible, just like everything else. But it's still, you're at the court's mercy. The fees I get paid are a lot higher, and because it is more work. And then there's extra court fees and extra appraisals by people who are appointed to appraise things. You can't even choose that. And it takes a lot of control out of people's hands. And so I think for that reason, if you've got, and the caveat on the property is, if you own real estate that is worth less than $55,000, which could be a few hermits out there, then you don't need probate. Anything above that, requires some kind of probate hearing and petition. But again, I say it because we've run across some things where, maybe if you're living way up in northern San Bernardino County, there we handle a house that was worth $50,000, or maybe you've got that Joshua Tree lot that's $20,000, and you haven't moved your shipping container on there to live in yet. Well, again, you can probably get away with it. It's called something like affidavit for real property of small value, something like that.
Yeah.
And it is a simple process, I'll say that. But for the rest of us, you're going to want to trust. And it's not that expensive and makes things, again, a whole lot easier in the end.
It does. It really does. And I'm surprised when as free as information is out there, and so many people are saying, look, you're giving your offspring pure hell
Mm-hmm.
by not having a game plan before you pass. And these are difficult conversations. And I've shared this with you over the past year or so with my family, and they did it the almost worst possible way by not having a will, by not having a trust, by doing things at the last possible minute, right? When they're ill,
Yeah.
not feeling well, when they're incapacitated, and they're in a very vulnerable state,
Yeah.
and that wasn't fun for any of us. It really wasn't.
No. And as you find out, there's just some loose ends that wind up kind of being not major pains, but a lot more painful than they could have been.
Yeah.
And so at least with the lawyer, you got someone to blame or someone to fix things if they didn't.
That's right.
If they missed something, they're the ones who've done it. I've done one pre-probate in my career, and that's because someone at my old firm apparently didn't take care of getting a property in, and we could not find it. And anyway, they did a petition in the probate court and got it out to them anyway. But when you do the trust yourself, you don't have that protection, or a paralegal. again, it's they can't fix it for you.
Now, you get what you pay for, Chris.
True, true.
You get what you pay for. So, let's get back to Prop 19 for a moment here. So, the title of it, Revenue for Wildfire Agencies and Counties Amendment. So let's talk about the good that Prop 19 does. So people who are affected by the wildfires in the state of California in this last year, 2 years, they're also able to take their tax basis from one home to another. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Which also I think that works out well.
But we still have to be 55 years or older.
Oh, is it? I am not sure. I did not read too much into that part.
Let me see here. So the new law, which takes effect April the 1st, expands the class of homeowners who are able to transfer their taxable value to include victims of wildfire or other natural disasters. Oh, regardless of age or disability status. It's a big change.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right? You don't have to be 55 anymore.
Yeah.
The new law also removes the restriction that the replacement home must be in the same county as the old home, right? So I think you made reference to that earlier on.
Yeah, it was a big restriction because if there were some counties that agreed to reciprocate, but they said it was certainly not a complete list of all the California counties.
Boy, that's great for people who were affected by the wildfires.
Yeah, I think that's something that, and probably didn't get enough publicity beforehand and not even had thought of that. But yeah, unless you wanted to stay in your same residence, then yeah, you're stuck buying something new and paying the new property tax basis.
Right. So in this article I'm reading, it says no real planning needs to be done in connection with this change, but the new rules that apply to transferring taxable value are something homeowners should note. And this is what you said earlier in our chat about applying to the county assessor. Is that right?
Yeah. Because when you do make a parent to child transfer, there's a form that also needs to go to the assessor. And that can be filed with the deed, which is probably the best way to do it, or within 3 years of the transfer. And then actually, they really the only real deadline was when the property went to a third party, you'd lose out. So sometime, and I did hear some sad cases like that where kids inherited mom's home. They just kept it. They didn't even transfer the title, so it never came up. They never got a question from the assessor.
Right.
Keep it in Silver Lake for 15 years, and then decide finally, well, it's time to sell it out of the trust to a stranger. And they make great money, and then they get a tax bill for the last. They can't go back all the years, but I think they go back to something like 7. So they get a supplemental tax bill on the value of what the house was for the last 7 years, saying,
no,
extra taxes. And sorry, I know it's a parent to child exclusion, but you're too late on that. So sorry. So it's really also another reason why, it's good to see the lawyer after someone passes away, just to make your list of things that need to happen. Because those are things, nobody knows. They don't know about these things.
Yeah.
And trying to find a checklist out there like that is pretty difficult. So at least the lawyer can alert people to things that they may not be aware of that may wind up costing them. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think people they don't want to think about the eventuality of death. Right.
No.
And depending upon your background, we've talked about my relatives being very stalwart, I think is might be a good word for them, but they had no desire to ever talk about death, about wills, money, etc. Right. So it became an emergency. It could have very easily been taken care of in the last years of their lives. And because they were uncomfortable with it, they just didn't take care of the trust, will, etc. until the last possible minute. Right.
Oh,
So we have all of these ingredients. And as a kid, as a younger person, how do you have that conversation with mom and dad? You're like, look, mom, look, dad, do you guys have we never talk about anything. Do you guys have a will? Do you have a trust? I think you may have muted yourself, Chris. Can't hear you.
Oops. Oh, there.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So, yeah. All right. So, yeah, I'd say at least ask the question of them if they have the will or preferably the trust if they've got real estate here. And, sometimes that's the most you can do is ask, and they may shut it down right there. And I will say a lot of times people lie and say they've done something and they haven't, I think, just to stop it. But at least ask. And I try to tell the parents too, well, you can just tell the kids you've done it, and maybe where to find things when they need to, but they don't need to know everything. They don't have to have a copy of the trust if you don't feel comfortable with that.
Right.
Or just tell them to, contact my office and leave the card in there, because they can get a copy at the appropriate time, which is basically to the successor trustee when the parents passed away or incapacitated, and not before. So there's a lot of ways to do it and still, keep your autonomy or keep, sometimes the parents want to share everything, which I think is great. Other times they don't, which is also fine. But I think you just want to have it done. And then really, I think it is good to at least have the attorney have a copy or someone else, because there are those cases where sometimes the people who don't like what's in there will want to get rid of it. And it doesn't happen as often as you would think it does, but enough that it's an issue for us, So we've gotten some cases where we're just asking the court to impose what we think are the trust terms because there are pages missing. Or, if a will's gone, how did it go? Someone maintain, I've done the will, I did it. I've got one where she was retired military, used a military lawyer to draft the will, and they keep a copy as well. And, talked about it even up until her death. But then the person who was cut out of it was also the person who happened to be living there, and we couldn't find it in the house. Well, I think that one seems pretty obvious that it was still around. She didn't revoke it. And, that's what the court will say. But that's why, there have been other cases where I know it's gone missing. Nobody can find it. And you have a pretty good idea of what happened to it, but you'll never know what was in it.
Now, do you maintain a file of wills and trusts there in the office?
I do. We keep everything on PDF and out in the secure cloud. Yeah. It's all HIPAA compliant. So it's pretty secure, but that means also we're not going to lose it. And I just know people will call years later to find them. And sadly, the firm I left a while ago, 10 years ago now, they had all my old files and they said they would keep them, but I don't think they realized, in the estate planning world, what that means. And they don't have any of it. And so sometimes people will call and I'd say, I don't think you're going to find it there, but that's why we've got a very strong program keeping it here. Because I know, even 20 years from now, I will be getting calls from people looking for these things and we want to have it.
So what happens? I mean, if you hire a lawyer 25, 30 years ago, right? And that law firm, for whatever reason, goes out of business, where do all those documents go?
Typically, they will go to someone else who takes over the practice. So the way it should happen is you make an arrangement and new lawyer takes over, a new firm. sends out, email, or in the old days, letters to all the clients. And hopefully you've got an updated list of where things are now. And then ideally they're going to maintain all the email addresses and the phone numbers, just because, again, people are going to call years later and may not know what happened to you, or they're retiring, or, but again, in the ideal sense, they've got it on their website about which firm they've taken over. And so they're easy to find. What may happen more often is, someone just passes away without a plan. And the practice may or may not get taken over. In that case, the files are supposed to be turned over to the state bar, but it does not always happen. Usually just sit in a storage place for years and then get tossed at some point. So
they haven't paid their bill.
Yeah. It shows up on Storage Wars. So like, well, what am I going to do with all these old wills? This is worthless. And some ancient law books. But it's still best, and for the originals, I know some attorneys will keep them. I prefer to have the clients take them because, again, we are going to do our best to keep everything, but I don't know what will happen. And so, I've got my plan and even the succession plan, but still, I think it's better for the clients to have their original stuff. We send them PDF copies as well, so they can keep them somewhere safe. And I just like having at least one or two copies out there in other places that people can find, and our names on the deeds when we record them into trust, so that people may be able to track us down if they can't find that trust. Just all the things I've learned over the years when we're trying to track things down, I want to do the same to make it kind of easy for the future successor trustees and beneficiaries to figure things out.
Yeah. With our family trust documents, the originals are in a safe, and then I have other PDF copies out. Like I've emailed them to other family members, so they're out there.
Yeah,
out there in the.
And that keeps everybody honest. And then if the awful house fire comes, or that person who thought they should be in there and was not takes your safe and dumps it off a boat, it's they're not going to get away with it.
Jesus, there's no getting in that safe, man.
Oh, I don't know. I've been well. One thing I've learned that I don't keep a lot of cash anyway. But if I was the type to, I've learned not to, because people will say, oh, they had 50,000, 100,000 in the safe, and it's gone, and what can we do about it? I'm like, well, cry. I mean, there's not much else you can do.
That's right.
Unless you can prove who took it, and that's usually what they come, is you go into the house and find an open and empty safe. So I just, so I guess on yours, someone will probably get in, and because the trust isn't worth money, it'll probably get into the right hands.
Yeah.
But if there's any cash in there or anything else, I don't think that's going to wind up.
No.
Except in the pocket of the first finder.
There was a news story a few years ago about a guy who passed, and they found gold coins, like gobs and gobs of money on this guy's property. I don't think they found it all either.
No, wasn't that? Well, there's that Binion's horseshoe guy in Vegas that I think the people got arrested for. It was the wife and her boyfriend or something, where had their bulldozers out digging up the property. Oh, yeah. I at least as a lawyer, I like things with titles, because then we can trace it. If a car has changed hands, or property, bank accounts, withdrawals, or even things in a safe deposit box. If it's not someone who's listed on the box, they keep a record of who shows up. One, but then if your name's not on it, they will open it up with a death certificate, inventory the contents, lock it back up, and then also, again, the person who was there's the record of that. And the only thing they can get is the will, which they then have to deposit with the court.
Oh.
So that's another a safer way, I guess, to keep things. But, again, most people will put a joint tenant on the box or someone else who has access. And, again, how do you prove what was in there?
Yep.
Um,
That's right. That's right. So anything else that we need to cover with Prop 19? Any tips or first thoughts? I mean, this is all new. This is new to all of us. Can you think of any ways in which you're going to change your operating practices because of this, or ways in which you can help people?
well, I think that the only thing that comes to mind right now is that if people were thinking of making gifts anyway out to kids of real estate in California, now's the time to do it because those do have to get in the recorder's hands. Not necessarily recorded, but we've got to prove that we got the transfer deeds to the recorder by February 15th. And there is going to be a mad rush of that. Uh, so I would say that, if you're thinking about a gift, or for those lucky enough to have some estate tax problems,
Right.
to explore this. We've been doing some gifts that actually make a lot more sense now, um, especially if the kids may not be planning on moving into the house after the parents die, because that now with Prop 19, that is the only exception for inheritance that's allowed.
Mhm.
It's between parents and children, and the recipient's going to have that as their primary residence.
Right.
And so that may, well, it may mean that maybe we write trusts a bit differently and do that. Or if one of the kids is really interested, there are certain ways we can do that where, uh, again, we can preserve that property tax exemption. But otherwise, um, for most people, they probably keep on living the way they live. And if the house is their main asset, then it probably really only makes a difference if the kids really want to hang on to it. And so for investment property, it is going to get reassessed. For a principal residence, though, it won't. So that might be a conversation you'd have with the kids, because there are some who really, they do keep the house in the family for 3 or 4 generations, and that's where this will still be available until the state legislature decides that's just an egregious violation that needs to be taken care of.
Right. So I think you mentioned earlier, when we if parents make a gift of a property, then there's a burden on the person that they give that property to, right? Did I understand you like a parent, like, for example, if I'm 80 and I make a gift of my primary residence to my son, for example, right? Did you say that there is a taxable event there?
Well, only to the extent, if there'd be a gift tax, but we have that the estate tax exemption, and it's also for gift taxes too. It's lifetime gifts plus at death. And so if your estate's well under the 11.6 million, you do have to file a gift tax return, but there's going to be no gift tax owed.
Gotcha.
And so you can make that gift, and then uh, they're going to, if the child, well, before February 16th of next year, they can do anything they want with it. The property tax is not going to go up.
Right.
After February 15th, then they are going to have to use that as their principal residence, or it's going to get reassessed at the fair market value. And
Then
they
and
pay
there.
property taxes on that.
Right. Yeah, that's going to hurt.
It is. I think there's
Ooh,
a lot of people who kept investment property, or the parents bought a lot, and in California, it's a great investment, and so people tend to want to keep it. But that means that it's in the future. There's probably going to be a lot more sales, which helps real estate agents.
okay.
Or it also means that, if they keep it, it just means the rents are going to go up to cover that extra property tax.
Right. If that's at all possible.
Yeah, I wonder with commercial property.
Because it's 8%, residential, right? It's 8 or 10% once a year, I think, is what the state has allowed us to do.
Oh,
Like
well,
if I own a property and I'm renting it to someone, not a commercial property.
oh, well, we don't have the statewide rent control yet, I don't think, but yeah, in city of LA, yeah, it's going to be very restricted, and they don't really much care about how much your expenses go up.
Right?
You know, they
No, you know, no.
so yeah, that's also, if your parents own commercial property or like tenant rentals in the city of LA, make sure they increase the rents as much as they can every year and do whatever they need to do with the rent stabilization board.
Yeah,
Because I have seen properties where, someone was 90 years old, they didn't really need the money or didn't want to raise rents, and people are paying rents, from 20 years ago.
yep,
And the new people who get the building are under the same restrictions, and there's a process you can go through to raise your rents more than the 2 or 3% the city of LA will allow, but
yeah.
it's difficult. I'll say it's very difficult. So, yeah, that's something else to look at. I think people in that situation, they've just wound up, and the market's good like it is now. It's just easier to sell it to an investor and let them work it out.
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly not the climate with rent stabilization in most parts of Los Angeles where we practice. It's it's the best place to be a deadbeat tenant. It really is.
Oh, yeah.
It really is. I mean,
People.
it could take you 6, 9, 12 months to evict somebody, and all that time you're losing revenue and your time and energy and resources to get.
And then if you have to get rid of them, for whatever reason, and they're paying on time, well, you're also going to have to pay them tens of thousands of dollars to get out of there.
That's right.
And I've talked to the tenants, and they're still afraid because they're never going to get that good a deal anywhere else. Even if they walk away with $40,000,
That's
they're
right.
still going to have to pay a lot more in rent somewhere. So they're going to fight to stay there.
Yep. Absolutely right. It's all too common. It's
Uh,
all too common out there. Well, Chris, thanks so much for getting together today on Prop 19. And I think we should probably cover maybe in another call we can talk about the gifting of property and what that all means, and if there's expenses associated with it, and if that fits into I guess an estate plan or succession plan.
but sure, because there are a whole lot of ways to give property away, and some that kind of depending on, yeah, how much you want to give away, how much control, how much money do you need, or do you need none at all, or any of that. There's a whole lot of ways. So, yeah, I'd love to discuss that sometime.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and you'll see how to reach Chris at the bottom of the screen, and we'll see you again real soon.